All right, so today we're going to be talking about the information processing model. We're going to go relatively quickly, so let's get going. All right, so first up is we have this model, which you should have an image of, and you can see how we have information coming in through the environment, getting filtered, and there's these different points where there's these outputs, but that some stuff continues going through and interacting back through. So put your finger on each piece as we go through it, and we're going to learn a little bit more about it, okay? So the very first stage that we're going to be looking at is going to be the sensory register. And so the sensory register is here depicted by these slots, these blinds. The sensory register is responsible for determining the strength and the importance of every stimuli that we have. So how we register touch, sight, hearing, smell, taste, all of those things, and filtering out things that are repetitive or that are deemed unimportant. So something that might be considered a repetitive stimuli might be what you're experiencing right now. You might have tuned out the fact that there's some background noise happening. So I put on a soundtrack of murmuring in the hallway. And we all know we can kind of get to a point where we tune that out. This is an automatic process. We don't actively choose what gets filtered out by our sensory register. So next things go into the immediate memory from the sensory register. So anything that isn't determined as unrepetitive or is determined to be important to us goes into this immediate memory, where you can hold on to that information for about 30 seconds. If it's still determined, not to be important, it's forgotten at this stage. And the brain really prioritizes the stimuli or the input that are considered a threat to survival or emotional data. And so those are two things that we hold on to. Our brain determines if this is an important thing for us to know or hear or unimportant. And this is why you might be tuning out the murmuring of the hallway, but you might hear a phone call, right? Because that's deemed as important to your brain. That's how you've trained your brain, okay? The next stage of the short-term memory, so the second part of the short-term memory, is going to be our working memory, okay? And our working memory is going to be a conscious processing step, okay? Adolescents and adults can hold between 5 and 9 items of information here at a time, okay? And we're going to do a little test of our working memory just to see how we are at our working memory, so you can practice utilizing it, okay? So again, this is a conscious processing. Same thing, if it's determined to be unnecessary, we weed it out. If it's determined to be important to us, it moves on into our long-term storage. So let's test out our working memory. So I'm going to flip the slide, and what I want you to do is I'm going to give you 5 seconds to stare at a series of numbers. And then after 5 seconds, I'm going to remove the numbers, and I'm going to ask you to write down on your piece of paper what those 5 numbers are. Ready? All right, so I want you to take a couple seconds, and I want you to write down what those numbers were. There are 5 numbers. Okay, now check your answer. How'd you do? Okay, if you did pretty well, okay, great. We've got some good working memory. Let's try it a little bit harder, okay? So we're going to do the same process, except I'm going to give you a few more numbers, okay? So again, I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, so I want you to write down those those 10 numbers. Check your answer. Okay, how did you do? Okay, so what's important here for us to realize is that, it's harder to hold more pieces of information. And something like a 10-digit number, we can actually remember a little bit better if we chunk information. So this is a little trick that you can use. So for example, I can tell you 617, because that's an area code, 713, 5000, okay? And that's the school's phone number. But if it was just presented to me like this, okay, there's two things. This is 10 pieces of information. This is 3 items of information, so my brain can handle this one easier. Second piece here, there's a reason I might want to know this phone number. So meaning, is important. So that's just something to think about with our working memory. Okay, in our working memory, we want to take apart, rebuild, rework the information. We're going to be analyzing. We're going to be making connections. It requires a lot of attention. It requires a lot of focus. Okay, so for that reason, you can see here on your image, some things in working memory are coming from the immediate memory, and some things are coming out of long-term storage. Okay, so if I asked you right now, could you remember the first 5 digits that I gave you? Absolutely not. Okay, if I asked you to do the same exercise with a phone number, and I gave you a phone number, say, to a pizza place, and then I asked you to call it 30 seconds later, that would still be in your working memory, and it would be there a little bit longer. One, because you've got the motivation to remember it. You know you're going to get yourself a nice slice of pizza out of that. And then second, what I just explained to you with the phone numbers being chunked into 3 parts, okay? If I asked you in, say, an hour, it would be forgotten now, right? Because it isn't in your long-term storage. It's just in your working memory, okay? So what about something like your home phone number? And I know you guys use cell phones, and so you might store a lot of things, but I'm sure there's one phone number that you know. You might know your mom's phone number or your grandmother's or someone whose phone number you have to dial often, okay? How do we get to know that, where if I just say, tell me your home phone number, you can recite it? Well, it's due to rehearsal. And rehearsal happens in 2 ways. Okay, there's rehearsal through repetition, going over things over and over and over, and just repetition. Helpful is to chunk information. That makes this repetition easier. Okay, and the second way is to attach some sort of meaning. With a home phone number or even with your favorite pizza place, that meaning is there for you. There's a reason for you to know that knowledge, okay? And so this storing is the process of encoding, okay, which is going to help us get to our long-term storage. Now, long-term storage, that's going to be where we're going to have things that make sense. So it has to make sense to us, and it has to have some sort of meaning to us, okay? This is where your memories are encoded, okay, and organized into different storage sites by the brain. So you can see 3 different storage sites, okay? The system is going to be interactive because if we are recalling a single memory, it's not just coming from like one spot. It's going to be coming from different places. If I think about the memory of a Thanksgiving, I'm activating smell senses, I'm activating taste senses, I am activating maybe things that I hear. Is there a football game going on? Is my family laughing, right? So your long-term storage to recall a memory is going to activate many parts of your brain, okay? Some of the types of things that are in your long-term storage are going to be episodic, things that happen over and over again, procedural, how to do something, and then also like imagery, like a mental image, okay? So we talked about encoding and storing information, and that's not the only piece of learning that's really important. We also need to be able to retrieve information. So sometimes we have problems with retrieval where we know something and we just can't get it out, right? And so that is an area that we're going to be looking at. So what we know from the research is that the greatest loss of new information or skill occurs between 18 and 24 hours. So the next day, 24 hours later, is a great guideline for determining if information or a skill has reached this long-term storage. Then once it's in long-term storage, we've got to do some practice at retrieving it, but did it get there to begin with? Okay. The next piece that I want you to think about is this triangle here. And the triangle, okay, between self-concept and around the long-term storage, that is not a great drawing triangle, sorry, that's going to represent our cognitive belief system. And our cognitive belief system is our construct of how we see the world. It includes all that we experience and store in our long-term storage, as well as our self-concept, which is our view of ourselves in the world. How do we see ourselves against the world? So, for example, I would like you to mentally picture an old bat. Okay. Based on your experiences, you might be thinking of different things. You could be thinking of a baseball bat that's old and wooden and has been used a lot. You could be thinking of like this kind of bat. I'm not a very good drawer, but you guys already know, like a fruit bat. That's an elderly fruit bat. Or you can be thinking about, say, a mean lady with a lot of hair that's mean and says, angry things. So, like kind of an old hag. You can think about that as an old bat. So all of these things are old bat, okay? But what you think of is based on what's in your long-term storage and how you see yourselves in the world. If you're a biologist, you might think this way. If you're an athlete, you might think this way. I don't know. Lots of things can just make you think this way. You might be a ferocious reader, okay? What you're exposed to helps you determine that. Right? So the self-concept here is represented by this smiley face. It could be a neutral face. It could be a sad face. It's impacted by our past experiences, and it can range from a positive to negative emotional response. Our self-concept, with a series of learning situations, impacts our overall mindset. And this can then positively or negatively trigger our sensory register, remember that filter from the beginning, either towards or against future learning. So for example, we might have a student who has struggled in math, and like those multiplication tables were like really, really hard for them, and they took a long time to have to get them and didn't feel like they were very successful. Okay, they would have a lower self-concept, okay, and that student might be someone who avoids math. Like they'll do all their other homework first, or they'll do anything to avoid doing any sort of math, right? And so what we know is that people will avoid these learning activities where they have found failures or difficulties, but they'll engage in learning activities where they've found success. So they might have gotten really positive feedback about writing poetry, or they might have really enjoyed doing a hands-on lab, and so they'll engage in those activities. So what's important for even when we have things that are difficult is to think about how our self-concept is then going to impact our future ability to learn, okay? If I focus on my failures and that emotion, that's going to make it really hard for me to learn that again. Whereas if I think about my successes and focus on what things I've found successful, okay, I might not know all of my times tables, but I might know from 1 to 10. And that's a success. So if you think about things positively and how you have your own framework and mindset, really impacts future learning. So that's really important to kind of be able to open our sensory register to future learning experiences. So that is the information processing model, and we're going to be working with this a lot, so I hope that this was kind of an informational helpful thing for you. All right.